So I'm here today with special guest G. Edward Griffin. Thanks for joining the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure. We have some fun together, I guess.
Always. And I've asked you a lot of stuff, so I thought it would be difficult to come up with questions, but it wasn't. I sat down today in the sun and I wanted to start with this question, and I think I have some good ones as well. But they
Okay.
just said they're passing this big, beautiful bill. I don't know if you've been following it. Trump and the Republicans are saying it's big and beautiful, and the dissenters like Thomas Massey, maybe Peter Schiff, a few others are saying it's not that. I wanted to know your take on it.
Well, this is quicksand, of course. Let me preface my comment by saying I don't really pay much attention, serious attention, in terms of belief to anything any politician says. Now, the reason I hesitated on that word any is because there are a few exceptions, and Massey is one of them. Everything I've ever seen or heard or witnessed that Massey did was 100% accurate, although it was unpopular. He was always rising above that popularity test. Politicians don't do anything that they think is going to be unpopular, and they certainly don't tell the truth if that's unpopular. But Massey is one of those rare exceptions. That's why I hesitated on the word anybody. But so I don't listen. I don't even listen to them because I know that the job they have as a politician is to win elections, and I think if people think about it carefully, they'll understand why that is. So I tend to give them a free ride on this, but the the gum chewing public generally expects politicians to lie. They kind of think it's clever. Oh, well, they always say, well, you can't trust a politician. No, they always lie. And so people know that, but still they believe them when they hear them speak. Reminds me of my mother in law before she passed away, the dear woman. She always used to say, these newspapers, she'd be reading the newspaper every morning. These newspapers, you can't believe anything you read. It's all a bunch of bunk and lies. And then a few minutes later, she'd say, oh, listen to this. And she'd read something. And so there's, I guess it's cognitive dissonance. The American people and probably around the world, we know that everybody knows that politicians lie. It's part of the job, and it's sort of a contest to see how good they are at it. So nobody seems to complain. They continue to go back to the same guys over and over again, or the gals, knowing that they're liars, and they know that's part of the necessary role they have to play to stay in office, because they have to appease everybody. And so principles are never to be counted upon with most professional politicians. So with that background, I have that cynical attitude about all of that. I just wait till they're through talking, and I tend to look at their record and see what uh, sometimes they'll do some good things. That's true. But
Right.
then I've noticed that later on they undo them. The same things they did that were good a few months later. What happened to that legislation? Oh, it's gone. Or they were pushing it really hard. Yeah, well, it's gone now. No, they didn't do it. So anyway, that's my preface. And to tell you the answer to your question is I don't think much about it because I think it's theater. I think it's I think it's part of a program that's being applied across the board now to put the American people to sleep, to make them think, we've won. We've finally gotten out from under this great shadow, all of this crazy, extreme left wing commie stuff. We finally won. We beat them at the polls and so forth. Now, the same people who say, oh, yeah, they control the polls, that the elections were rigged, and they still control the election process, same people. But this time around, it was fair, wasn't it? Because well, was it? I don't know. I'm just skeptical. I always ask questions. So anyway, I think that the American people need to be a little more savvy about this theater called politics. So getting back to your question, I don't really get excited about it. I hope it's true, all the good things they say, but I doubt it, and time will tell.
Right. Yeah. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now. And I think when you know the macro, the big picture, you stop falling for kind of the small little stories. And it reminds me of Trump's first term where he did all these things. And then during COVID, really everything got unwound. And a lot of people said to me, well, that was just a mistake and he'll do different this time. And I always said, possibly, but what if it was just a story? Like when you watch the WWE, you can't just have two heroes. You need a hero and a villain. And you watch a movie and he almost gets got by the enemy. You know, they always point the gun at him and they
Mm,
say, any last words? And then they wait for 3 minutes so he has a chance to escape or whatever. And I always
mhm.
try to compare it to that, or Tom and Jerry, where, you know, they're always, the cat's always chasing the mouse, but he never quite gets there because if he ever got there, the show would be over. So it's
That's
hard.
it, exactly. The show would be over, and that's what I was trying to say a moment ago. I look at politics, unfortunately, has become a show. It's theater. And look at those conventions, how absurd they are. All these million I say millions of people, but at the other end of the television set, yes, and they're all getting all excited and cheering, and they don't know what they're cheering about. No matter what they say on the stage, it's hooray, and they wave the banners, and it's insane. It's mob psychology, is what it really is, and I hate to be so negative about that. I don't think it's negative, actually. I'm not negativistic. I'm realistic, I think,
Right.
because I've watched this show play for so many years. I'm 93 years old now, and there's not much that happens that I haven't seen happen before over and over again. So after a while, you get kind of jaundiced about these theatrical antics that they show.
Well, some people get really stressed out about the small, like every day is a new thing. I think,
Mm,
you know, those will be the people that will accuse you of being negative while they're so negative about every story. Meanwhile, you become more calm, I think, when you see the big picture because you don't have to freak out over every
mhm,
little detail. Like, oh my
mhm.
gosh, I can't believe the Democrats did that, or I can't believe Trump endorsed it. And it's like, at this point, I'm like, I absolutely can believe all of these things. They're not
You don't have to believe anything, just watch and see what happens, and
right.
don't be so naive that everything they say is meaningful, because look, they spend everybody knows this too, it's like my mother-in-law. Everybody knows that politicians spend a lot of money with polls. They're always trying to find out what people want to hear. Why
Mhm.
do they do that? That's because they want to tell them what they want to hear. It makes no difference whether they have any conviction. They just want to get elected. They want those votes. So once you understand that, you can't be too critical about the politicians, even though I am, but I kind of sit on that for a while. But because the people seem to enjoy it. It's like a game, and the unspoken rules of the game is that politicians are going to lie to you. Isn't that cute? Ha ha ha. I don't think it's so cute.
Next question I wanted to ask you about is false flags. I remember during Trump's first term, they released the early JFK files. And one of the biggest bombshells I thought in it, it came out in CBS News as well, mainstream. And it was that they were planning to sink a boatload of Cubans. And then they said real or simulated, which showed that the government had plans to either really actually sink a boatload of Cubans or pretend to and simulate it in order to push this narrative of whatever they wanted against Cuba. This was decades ago. And, you know, I know there's a lot of situations in history that have been confirmed now where the reason they work so well is because if you don't have public support for a war or some sort of agenda, once there's a massive attack or some sort of massive tragedy, people are much more interested in supporting it. So I guess my question is like, what do you think about false flags? And also, you know, how hard it is to maybe suspect that something is, because if you come out and say that something is, you know, people get mad at you because it's usually around a very sensitive event by design. And I'm not saying everything's fake, obviously, but you know, do you think they stopped doing this, like, you know, in the last couple of years, or that they still do it?
No, absolutely, they haven't stopped because it works. Why would they stop? Now we have to be clear who we're talking about when we say they. Are these our friends who have these misconceived ideas, who are totally sold at what they read in the newspaper or hear on the nightly news on television, that everything, all that's accurate and all that's true, and so they act accordingly. Their convictions are based on whatever information they have been given. I mean, I think that we have to realize that humans are very much like computers and like AI even. They're computers basically, and that is that the smarter they are, meaning the more chips they have and the greater memory they have and the greater calculating ability they have, meaning smart, they can do all these things fast, the easy it is to program them to deceive. and they don't think of there's to a machine, a computer, there's no such thing as deception. It's they don't have any feelings about that. It's neither good nor bad to present good information or false information. It makes no difference to a machine. It just depends what it's told to do. and so anyway, I look at the people pretty much like that, and the smartest people. Amazingly, at first I thought it was amazing. It seemed like the smarter people were, the more apt they were to fall for propaganda. And then I realized, well, that's the same thing as the computer. The smarter the computer is, the easier it is to program it for very complex uh, calculations and processes. So anyway, I'm digressing for a minute. Basically, the question of what do I think about it, and that is that, well, no, they haven't. They are the politicians, and I don't necessarily mean the guys running for city council. I'm talking about the global politicians who have big stakes in mind, and it's the whole bloody planet that they're trying to bring under their control. And that is not an extreme statement, by the way. I think everybody, including my mother-in-law, if she were still alive, would understand that yeah, there is a cabal, and everybody can see it, and they just kind of say, yeah, the powers that be, but they don't really think of them as humans and so forth. Anyway, so everybody knows that there is a cabal, there is a group, a very powerful, wealthy group who want to dominate the planet, and they're increasingly speaking openly on their own objectives. It's sort of out in the open now, and it's become acceptable to the human mind because we're conditioned to it. If they threw it all at once at us, we would rebel, but we sort of ease into it like the proverbial frog in the boiling cup of water or pot of water. So yeah, I think that the the false flag has everyone knows it has always historically been a very powerful tool by these global or national politicians to get the public to accept things they would never accept otherwise. The United States, unfortunately, is at the probably maybe not at the head of that list, but very close to it if it's not on the top of the list, as using false flags. They used it to get us into World War One, and they used it certainly to get us into World War Two. World War Two, I happen to know a little bit more about because I had occasion in one of my projects to really dig deep into the history of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and I came away. Even I was shocked at the depth of the deception that was emanating from Washington D.C. to entice Japan, to tempt Japan, to prod Japan into attacking us, doing everything, knowing the mentality of the Japanese culture and the necessity to save face and so forth. Then they boasted about it in writing later on. They were trying to prod the Japanese imperial forces and the political forces to attack the United States because we were interfering with their war against Asia and China and so forth. And so we cut off their oil supply. We were doing things that an enemy would do to them, and so they had to attack. I don't want to get into the details of all this, but I realized that this was carefully planned. This attack of Japan against American forces. It was planned by Americans in the White House and in Washington D.C. so that we could present ourselves to the world as being the victim, and therefore we were entering the war in revenge, and we were now righteous. Had it been known, as later some of these people revealed in their own memoirs and their diaries and in other documents, historians proved conclusively that the FDR in particular, and Stettinius and all of his cabinet members, some of them whom were members of the Council on Foreign Relations, even back in those days, they were plotting to get the United States into World War II as fast as possible so that they could be at the peace table at the end of the war and help to carve up the world and be a major player in the creation of this thing they like to call the New World Order. It goes way back to World War II and beyond. So once you dig into that history, you realize that hey, these false flags operations are nothing new, and they're extremely powerful. And the gum chewing public never suspects that they're being victimized by it. So you bet, I'm totally convinced. I know it's not just convinced. I know they're using false flag projects and strategies all the time.
It seems like for not just false flags, but any sort of tragedy or crazy event that they lied about, they're okay with telling people 10, 5, 7 years later after the damage is already done. For instance, I saw Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary. She admitted that the Iraq war was basically a lie in order to, seek revenge on. His name was Goldberg. He was on this group chat, that some sort of government group chat when they were talking about plans in Yemen. And I just thought to myself, I was like, if you would have told Republicans 20 years ago that the Iraq war was a lie, they would have freaked out. Now it's being said by the press secretary, as if I was to talk about one now, they'd freak out about me about the present one. COVID's same thing. Now all this disclosure is coming out. It's like, well, you just did trillions of dollars worth of damage, wealth transfer. God knows how many hundreds of millions of people took it who wouldn't have taken it with the information you're giving now. You know, I guess I'll say, like, do you think they're fine with telling people once it's already done? Like, oh yeah, that one was a lie, but this one's totally not a lie, the new one.
Well, yeah, that's the pattern. So I guess they're happy with it, and it works because by the time it is 20 years later, the passion, the energy, the uh, the anger, the hatred, the love, and all the emotional feelings are pretty well gone. And many of the major players are dead too. So you're not protecting anybody's reputation who's living. So you're a little freer to talk about it. And that goes on and on and on. We can talk about things that we did in the American Revolutionary War, things that we did in the Civil War, things that we did in the World War One, World War Two, and so not all of them are very good. Some of them are pretty nasty, but we can talk about it. Yeah, we did that. Isn't that terrible? You know, it's just like in Russia and the Soviet Union. They came to a point after Stalin was dead long enough that all of a sudden they said, "Yeah, Stalin was a big jerk and he was a terrible man. Good thing we got rid of him. That was then. This is now, sort of thing."
Right.
So I think that's that was then. This is now. Process is still going on.
I guess just one last question on it, because this is something that I'm always trying to be open minded with things. For instance, let's just say Trump's assassination attempts. On one hand, a lot of people hate Donald Trump. I know that for a fact, and there's a lot of crazy people out there. On another hand, there's some people that think it was completely staged. And what I noticed was Republicans who think a lot of things are staged, the Democrats will call them conspiracy theorists.
Mhm.
And then on this one, anybody that said that it wasn't real, then all the Trump supporters said, you're a conspiracy theorist, as if they don't think that about other things. So with me, I balance both out, where it's like, sure, absolutely, I could believe that it's true because a lot of people are crazy and they hate Donald Trump.
Mhm. Mhm.
However, I'm not going to smear somebody's character for suspecting. Like, how do
Mhm.
you kind of go about stuff like that? And how do you stop yourself from thinking everything is fake when some things are real?
Well, the way I prevent myself from taking everything at face value is what I said at the beginning, is I don't even listen to these things primarily when they come out, because I just assume that at least half of it is a lie. I just don't know which half, and it might be more than half. So I listen to it in a sense that I want to know what the news is all about and what people are getting fed to them and that what people are believing. But I don't listen to it in terms of this is the truth. I listen to it as well, this is a continuation of the psychological war in which we're engaged. I mean, people talk about, yeah, this is a psychological war, but I don't think they realize what that really means. It means that the news is part of that war. It's a major part of that war. So if you recognize that news is a weapon of war in our world today, and not the news, it's a weapon of war. Now you listen to it entirely differently. You listen to it, but you don't necessarily believe it. In fact, you start off by not believing anything. We have a little joke around here is that we don't, if some of these newspapers that we are famous for not telling the truth, the big papers, New York Times, Washington Post, and so forth, we joke around here. Well, heck, when we see we even check the numbers on the pages to make sure they're correct. We don't believe the numbers. And anyway, we have to joke about this along the way, or you go insane.
Yeah, well, on that note, I wanted to ask you, because I remember one time I asked you about kind of your diet, and I remember you talked about trace minerals, just some things that you like. As far as tips to a healthy life, what about mindset wise? How did you were you always this way? And like, say your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, did you ever have some sort of shift in your mindset, attitude towards life, stress, etc.?
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's a good thing because had I stayed on the track that I was on in the beginning, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. Uh, I would have been long gone. But what are those shifts? Some of them were dramatic and memorable. Most of them were just sort of easing along. My first, I suppose, my first cold slap across the face on all of this about my health and all that was when I was still very young, and I got into this obligation or commitment to my friend Dr. John Richardson to write a story about his experience with the California Medical Association, which was trying to force him to stop using a treatment for cancer that was highly successful, by the way, but had not yet been approved and would never be approved by the FDA. And so I didn't know anything about health. I didn't care about it. I just thought there were two groups of people in the world, uh, and I was in the lucky group that there were the sick people and the healthy people. And look, I was healthy, so I feel sorry for those sick people, but I'm unfortunately in the healthy group. And I always, in the back of my mind, I thought if I ever got sick, I'll just go to a doctor and he'll fix me up. And I never took any cognizance of the fact that I might be responsible for my own health because that wasn't an option given to me in school or in the media or in our culture. So anyway, when I did this research for cancer for my friend Dr. Richardson, I suddenly came across the reality, similar to what we've been talking about, of how much deception there is in the mainstream understanding of something as important as the news or as important as healthcare. You know, that there's a mainstream understanding that everybody accepts without really challenging. And I never challenged it at all. But I became aware in that period of research that there was a lot of deception going on, and that the early is cancer therapy. And so that was a jolt. And I began to think about the fact that I had been lied to by the establishment, the media, the advertising, the courses that teach what is healthy for you to eat. You go to a hospital and look at the hospital, the food that they serve you in a hospital. If you know anything about nutrition, you think, what are they trying to do? Kill people? You know? Uh, I mean, there are some exceptions, of course, and it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's far from being uh, on the top of the scale in far as healthy, nutritious diet. And yet, it's in a hospital, and the doctors themselves, the ones I've gotten to know very uh, closely and become very fond of, they tell me the truth. They said, "Look, we we went through medical school, and we were, I think." The average they had about 1 week of training out of all the years of study, 1 week on nutrition. And I discovered bluntly that their wives knew more about nutrition than these doctors did, and they're the first to admit it in general. So anyway, that was my first my jolt to say, wait a minute, I better learn about these things because I can't just go to the doctor and depend on his training, which was all financed by the pharmaceutical industry, because I realized then that there was the treatment of choice for everything was to take a drug of some kind. Well, that didn't sound too bad if the drugs work. Then I discovered, well, the drugs don't work. I discovered the final reality, all of that, which is like that little cartoon little meme we put on our front page of Need to Know News. Here's a doctor standing in front of a classroom and a big blackboard, and the students are out there. And he's a doctor with a stethoscope around his neck. And I think the title of it is the first day of training in med school. And the doctor's standing there with his pointer on the on the board there, and it says in the chalk, it says, "A patient cured is a customer lost."
Right.
And I thought, wow, there it was. The whole medical establishment has been built on the principle that to cure a disease is insanely stupid. because you get rid of all your customers. So the object in mainstream medicine, I discovered that way, and by digging into the research, the medical research, that it was all skewed against making money, and anything that would actually cure a patient was just ignored. It was not, they were not interested in it. So anyway, I'm taking too long as usual to answer a simple question. Uh, I had jolts like that along the way. That was probably the biggest one. And then from that point forward, it was just a question of realizing how true what I just said was. Because even though I understood it in principle, it's still I hadn't internalized it completely. And I still had those native instincts that, oh, I've got a cold, I'm coughing, I better go to the drugstore and get some cough medicine to stop my cough. And then I think, well, wait a minute, why do I have a cough? Nature gave me the cough to get rid of the phlegm, to get rid of the bugs, to get it out of my lungs and so forth. And if I stop the coughing, I'm going to get sicker or it take longer to recover. And that was the deal. I will have to buy cough medicine. That was the whole deal of that image. Buy the cough medicine. Don't get better. Just be dependent on the cough medicine. So I had to learn it incrementally along the way how definitely it did apply to almost every aspect of healthcare. So now I'm at this ripe old age, and I have to say, I abused my body pretty badly when I was young, like most people. You know, I thought I was made of steel, stainless steel, and bulletproof. Also, like most people, I didn't think I'd ever really get sick, and it was too bad about those old people. I'm glad I'm never going to be old. I really subconsciously that was my attitude. All right, so all of that's behind me. So what do I do now? Well, I have great respect for nature. I think that's a general way of explaining the the high view of everything. Don't necessarily go for um, every drug or every procedure that's offered to you on the media or even through the medical profession. It's all 110% aimed at making money, and it's not any of it aimed at curing. Maybe to control some symptoms. Okay, you can control a symptom, that's fine. But you keep the symptom and you have to treat it for the rest of your life. So they get you on these meds and you maybe have a symptom that goes away, but you've got to keep taking that med every day, every day, every day for the rest of your bloody life. And boy, is that an income stream to the pharmaceutical company. So anyway, the first lesson, really the overriding lesson, is to respect nature and don't go running to artificial man-made uh, substances or treatments as a first choice, maybe a last choice, but the first choice is to get back to the natural environment because nothing cures the body except the body itself. The body needs it needs nutrients, it needs input, it needs rest, it needs. Uh, you mentioned mental attitude. A correct understanding of the body includes the effect of your mind on all of the glandular and the biological functions of your body. If you're under stress, under pain, under worry, anger, any kind of an emotion that closes down your immune system and it brings into effect a lot of responses that are better aimed at flight and fight, defense, and these are not constructive responses to health. They may be necessary for your survival, but if you live under these conditions of flight and fight, you are not going to live very long. So I learned all those lessons along the way. So here I am, and I try to eat good natural foods. I try to avoid toxic things, all toxic things, not just drugs, but a lot of toxic things in food and it more. And it's hard to find good food that isn't toxic nowadays, especially with the stuff they're spraying on our crops, supposedly to keep the insects off of them. But if it kills the insects, it may not be so good for us either. Anyway, it's hard. It's hard to get good, clean food, and but it can be done. And so I have no secret except to try and exercise, get some sleep, avoid toxins, and think positively.
Amazing. It's crazy. We live in a matrix and a society where I'm sure this video will be fine, but there have been, I know, attempts probably to censor you, even though at your age of 93 years young, they would act like you don't know what you're talking about. You're not an expert, but you are actually an expert because you're living it. You are living proof that it's working. And I just think it's crazy, especially during COVID, it was ramped up, but you couldn't say anything. I couldn't even post the Nobel Prize winning inventor of the PCR test talking about his own invention. They would take that off of social media and say, sorry, this goes against our policy. Your policy is to silence a Nobel Prize winning inventor of the test that you're now using to test for COVID. Your policy is to not allow G. Edward to tell his life story. I mean, it's crazy that I even have to think that that's how this stuff has worked for the last decade or two.
Yeah, but the answer is yes, that is our policy. Yeah, and that's the reality, and you have to face it. That's sort of in the category of not getting so confident about a statement from a politician. The politicians have a policy to deceive, and the media has a policy to protect the control group. And that's a reality, and you have to face it. And if you pretend like it doesn't exist, you're stupid.
Right. Growing up, I always was suspicious of stuff. And I think it's a scary realization when you're right about what you were hoping you weren't right about. Like, I
Mm.
always thought the war was a lie. I always thought they lied about, the Iraq war. And then when I start really educating myself, it's frightening where I'm like, not only was I right, but as you said earlier, you're like, I wasn't even going far enough. Like, I thought I was
Yeah.
going too far.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. So there's a difference between being pessimistic and being optimistic. I mean, and being realistic. I got that backwards. Yeah, everybody thinks there's only two choices. You're either a pessimist or an optimist.
Right.
No, you need to be the realist in the middle of that. Otherwise, you're living in a false world either way.
I always tell people too that if I say criticize a politician or don't believe a news story, they'll say, "Oh, you're so negative, you're so pessimistic." And I always try to say, I don't derive my optimism and like hope for the world in what a politician says. To me, that's sad. Like, I'm having fun, I'm smiling, but they think I'm mad. But I was like, you think optimism is believing a politician? It's not optimism, because in a week you're going to be mad when you realize you got lied and tricked. You're like, oh, I got tricked again. It's
No,
like,
it's not optimism. It's stupidism.
I like that one. I wanted to ask you about, because you've been not only working but living for a long time, and I only know so much. I was born in 1989. I guess my question is, you've probably, and I know a lot of your story of how when you woke up to a lot of the corruption and maybe the globalism to an extent, but I guess my question would be economically. You've probably seen trouble for a while, and has it been worse than you thought or better, in the sense of, worse meaning, okay, well, now the average family works for this wage, but the money doesn't really go that far. Like, inflation has been horrific to the American people. Or has it been better where you thought there was going to be a bigger financial collapse than there actually was?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, there are a couple of forces at play there. Is it better than I thought it would be, or is it worse than it could have been, and so forth? Uh, Forgetting that kind of relativity on it, what I have seen is that my opinion about the forces we're discussing right now has definitely been on what I prefer to call the realistic side, which is not pleasant. It means we have to face some pretty serious realities if we wish to survive. So I don't call recognizing the seriousness of our situation, I don't call that being pessimistic. That's being realistic because I think we should survive. I don't think we should pretend like the ship isn't sinking because that's a negative thought. We should say, hey, the ship has a hole in it and it's taking on water, it's sinking. I think we better do something about it while we can. Otherwise, down we go, glub, glub, glub. So that's kind of how I look at it. Others who don't share my point of view call me negative or pessimistic or sour or something like that. Anyway, I want to survive, and I think most people do. And beyond ourselves, we want our country to survive. We want our culture to survive. We want the human race to survive. We ought to be on our guard against things that are endangering any of that. And that doesn't come usually with youth. I didn't come to me as a young person. I was not concerned about the outer world at all. I was just concerned about me, my family, my friends, my little circle, mostly what was inside my skin. How am I feeling about this? How am I doing? Am I making enough money? Am I looking good? Are we going to, what happens later? Am I going to have a nice house? And so me, and us. But once you get beyond a certain point, I don't know what it is. It started to happen to me in my late 30s and early 40s. It began to show up pretty clearly. I began to think in terms of the bigger picture. What about the future of the country? What about the future of mankind? What about my great grandchildren who are going to be born into the world that is evolving right now? Do I have a responsibility for that? And yeah, I joke about it. I say my crusader gene started to rattle. I, I didn't know I had one, but I did, and I still do. And it's rattling loudly the older I get. And I think it comes somewhat with age when you realize that there are aspects to life that are not just physical. There are spiritual and there are psychological and ethical issues at play, and they come to the surface after a while when you're through playing games and you want to get serious about why you're here on this planet. So older people get deeply into that a lot quicker than us us young kids. I used to think of myself back in the day. So having said all that, I don't know where I was going with that, but something you asked me made me think about all of that. So I think the point is that you just change as you go, and I do think about the future now a lot beyond. I'm certainly outside of my own skin. I think mostly outside of my own skin. And as I get really older, I'm kind of amused at myself because I think more and more about the imponderables, like what is time? What does this word eternity mean? What is infinity? What is that? Um, we have electricity, electrons, energy, we call it. What is energy? All these imponderables that you're wasting your time talking about or thinking about, because I honestly believe that some of these questions like that are beyond human understanding. It's, uh, it's like, I use the analogy of my first one, not my first dog, but one of my favorite dogs, Alpha. um, Beautiful dog sitting usually at my feet when I'm working on the computer and so forth. And I was sitting there one day, working on my computer, and I looked down, and Alpha was looking at my computer screen, and he was twisting his head and looked. He was really trying to study it. I could tell. And I looked down, and I found myself saying out loud, speaking to Alpha. That tells you how stupid I am. I spoke to Alpha with English, and I said, Alpha, you dumb, you'll never understand this thing. It's beyond your understanding, your capacity. You're just too dumb. And like a bolt of lightning, it hit me. I was speaking to myself. And I'm thinking, Ed, you're looking at the stars and the universe and these imponderable things like what is infinity and all these time. You you'll never understand these things. You are just too dumb. So why don't you get used to the idea, be comfortable with it, and get on with your life? So by the way, that's one of my great moments in life to realize that I can be comfortable with not knowing everything.
I got you. I think with even sort of your, I don't want to say rise because you've had a lot of great points, I'm sure, in your career, but with the internet, on one hand, there's a lot of censorship going on and they're cracking down. But on another hand, a whole new generation saw your work. So do you kind of see it as almost the yin and the yang, where everything happens for a reason and it's not even worth really stressing over whether it's economics or even censorship? Of course, you could do your best, but same with me. And some of the worst times were the times that I came alive and kind of was a defining moment in my career.
Yeah, I that is so true, and I think it's true in most lives of people I know at least. I don't think I've ever, maybe a few, who have said that no, they've not experienced that. Yeah, you come to be aware of yourself at a deeper level, and it leads to this thing called tranquility. You're now you're comfortable with being who you are and where you are and what you are. Yeah.
What are you working on now, and what excites you in year 2025 with everything going on? What's the lightning bolt that's hitting this year?
Well, it's I'm glad you asked that question because that's been uppermost in my mind, especially the last few days. Um, my big project right now is the Red Pill Expo. We have that sometimes once a year, and lately it's been twice a year. This time we're having the second. We're going to have two in this year. The Red Pill Expo is a big event for us. We're a little operation. We put on a big show like we were MGM or something like that, and so that's coming up in July 12 and 13 to be held in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we're putting that together. We're putting our speakers together, getting them online, and arranging. We're trying to sell some tickets. We want people to come. We're putting our lives into this thing, and we've got some of the greatest speakers you'll ever find. I mean, people like yourself. You know, you we tried to get you on stage once and that failed. Maybe we'll succeed the next time. But yeah, we have great people who understand, who have taken red pills themselves and want to share what they've learned with others. So I'm spending a lot of my time and effort on that. Now, the reason I'm laughing is because not of that, but because I have been working on my quote next book end quote ever since the day after 9/11.
Wow,
Now you might think that that book is never going to happen, but I work on it a little bit now, and then I keep adding a little bit, and I'm cranking away. I was sort of thinking, yeah, I got to put aside all these other things and get that book done because, boy, books are good. And all of a sudden, for some reason I cannot explain, but about 3 weeks ago, I was sitting right here in this chair. I don't know what I was looking at on the screen at the moment. I was probably researching something, some imponderable thing, and uh, and I had this idea that maybe this idea that was going through my mind would make an interesting opening to a chapter in my new book, and it just grabbed my brain. I said, yes, 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 let's do that, and so I stopped what I was doing and I started to enter my thoughts into the computer, and I got carried away by it. And the first thing you know, 2.5, 3 hours had passed, and I'm cranking away on my book. I haven't put that much time together in my book in a long, 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 long time. I thought, wow,
nice.
isn't that interesting? And it gave me a great, good feeling because I thought the idea was quite good. And then it happened again 2 days later, and I spent another 2 or 3 hours. This has happened to me about 5 times now, and I can't believe this that I'm having to tell you that I'm working on my book.
Nice.
And
Well,
so and I'm excited about it for the first time. I'm really excited about it.
love that. I have some questions about The Creature from Jekyll Island, your big book. I guess without getting too personal, I'm not trying to get into your amount made or anything, but like how many books have sold? And also, I guess my question is like did the internet, was it a straight line, or was there a moment where it became really popular again? What's been the trajectory of that book?
Well, to answer your first question first, I don't know how many copies have been printed. I suppose it's discoverable, but the reason I don't know is because it includes um, quite a few editions that are in foreign languages, and they're produced by publishing houses outside of the United States. And I get royalties on some of those. So, most of them I don't. I don't know whether they're not selling my books or just not sending me my royalties, but I don't really care. I like the idea that people are reading these books in Japan and in Germany and in France and Belgium and places like that. So, but the copies that we have printed in the United States now have exceeded about they've exceeded 1 million, which
Wow.
I can hardly believe. I mean, it just blows me away. And it could be quite a bit more than 1,000,000 because I think there have been some pirated copies of them. Now, if you add the audio version of the book, that's a whole nother version. I'm just talking about the printed book. We do have audio books out there too. And I would say probably another million.
D Did you do
And
all this independently? Is that why you don't have, like, that much like, did you ever have a major publisher, like, sell it
no,
anywhere? No?
no, no, no. No, I decided against that because I didn't want any publishing house telling me what I could or could not put into it.
Did it spread by word of mouth, or did you do marketing? Because 'Cause I've heard of it even before I met you. My friend had it on his table, and
Mhm.
he's a very smart, successful guy, financial, and he was like, "This book, this is how it all works." And this was years ago, so
Well, if he said that, then we know he's smart, right?
that's correct, yeah. Uh,
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So let's see. How do I answer that? The well, the audio books, I just don't have numbers on. I probably could figure it out, but there've been some pirated stuff going on, and at first I was kind of irate over that, and but then I got to thinking, you know, this thing is not about money anyway. I never wrote it to think I was going to make a living on that book. I wrote it because I wanted the world to discover what I had discovered, but I wanted people to be able to discover it in maybe a day or two instead of 7 or 8 years of my life that I had to plunge into that. And so I guess your question still is how.
like, what
What,
made it take off? Did you do
oh,
marketing, or was it
oh
word of
yeah,
mouth completely?
yeah. That's probably the more interesting part.
It's
It
all
was not.
interesting, I just wanna know that, yeah.
Well, to me, it's interesting because I thought you had to market a book to sell it. And that's the mainstream knowledge. If you don't market the book, and that's still true, um, it's not going to sell. You can have the best book in the world, but if nobody knows that the book exists, it's not going to sell very well. That's pretty obvious. So I started off by trying to get book reviewers, the well-known ones, to review my book. So I was sending free copies out to everybody that does book reviews, and nobody would touch it. They usually just didn't respond. And the few that did respond and did a review were very negative because, well, in retrospect, I understand is because they were really part of the establishment that controls distribution of information, and they saw that as a challenge to one of their favorite sponsors, which is of course the money system, the banking system, the people that issue credit and loans and so forth. So they don't want to get crosswise with those people. But I didn't understand that at the time. So I spent a lot of time sending copies around to book reviewers, and it went nowhere. And we got a couple of stores, large stores, that decided to buy a batch of books. Aha, we finally broke through into a store, and they bought maybe 100 copies or something like that. Or we thought that was a big order. And okay, well, we sent the books, but of course, with the stores, you don't get paid right away. They have very generous long-term payment terms, like it's 6 months or something, 4 to 6 months. And oh well, long as I get my money, I don't care. Well, it turns out that at the end of the 3 or 4 or 6 months, they send back all the books or most of them. By this time, they're all beat up and so forth. I thought, wait a minute. Many books as I thought. They're sending them back to me. So I learned the hard lesson that this is how the book business works. The big stores get their inventory basically free because the publishers give them a new book every month at least, and they can keep them for as long as they want and send the ones back that don't sell, and they keep getting new ones all the time, which is why the stores were not interested in a little publishing house like mine because I couldn't do that. So I thought, okay, I'm defeated. So I gave up. I just started to tell my friends about it and talk about it. And the first thing you know, people started ordering my books directly from me. And then the big breakthrough was when I got a letter followed very quickly by similar letters from other bookstores by saying, "Are you the publisher of Creature from Jekyll Island?" Yes. "Oh, well, we've had several requests from customers who want that book. Can we order it from you?" And all of a sudden, it was coming from the other side to me, instead of me trying to go that way. I said, "Yeah, how many do you want?" "Well, how about three?" Then, "Okay, I'll send you three." Well, they sold quickly. And so the next time they write back, the same people say, "Well, we'd like to order 10." "Oh, yeah. Oh, that's wonderful." And then the next order would be 20. And then the next order was, "Does it come by the case?" And, and that is how this book has gone. We stopped promoting it. We tried to advertise it once or twice. It did not work as an ad. So we just said, it's got to be word of mouth. And that is how it's been all the way.
Do you feel accomplished? If not, I'm going to try to make you feel accomplished because I feel like you've done a lot of things independently that really like almost a pioneer in these spaces where books, especially at that time, I'm sure it was really hard to self-publish. Now it's a lot easier. I think with Amazon, it's like anybody could self-publish. And also the interview with Yuri Bezmenov that you published that has been a hit. It feels like nobody was doing interviews on their own. Like that was a pretty big endeavor. You didn't have a podcast mic and a webcam. You had to really like go get all the equipment and do a professional interview. What year was that?
Yeah, well, that was back in the 1960s, late
Yeah.
60s and early 70s. We were cranking. Yeah, you had to get the equipment. And back in the day, the equipment was very cumbersome. It was we recorded in 3/4 inch tape. Um, big cassettes. They're about this big. I don't have any sitting around here, but anyway, we recorded on that, and we had to have cameras. The one we did of Yuri Bezmenov was done in Beverly Hills, and we had a truck out at the curb, and the cables came out of the truck all the way up into the house for the cameras. And we had some guy sitting in the truck running the recorders, and it was a big deal. Now you could do it all inside one little camera about this big. It's a whole thing and done.
Right. But
And
even back then, like it was easy probably for television studios to do, but for just you doing it yourself, do you feel like you're kind of a pioneer in that where most people that had success in any way, they were, working with somebody or had some sort of big investor where you're out here just making some magic happen on the publishing side and the interview side with, just your own kind of plan.
well, I never thought of myself as a pioneer, and still don't, because I know there were other people doing that too. It was the only choice. I mean, it was either that or die. And as an author, you die. If nobody knows you wrote a book, you're dead, man. So, and I never thought of myself as a pioneer, but it was my only option. So we had to do it.
Do you think you couldn't get, like you said, it was because of the content of your book? Like maybe if the book was doing well, but it was a different topic that maybe people would have been more interested, publishers. Do you think it's been controlled for a long time like it is now? If you say certain things, it doesn't matter how great it is or how well it's selling, that they just won't touch it?
Well, there has been control, yeah, for a long time before I ever showed up. I didn't realize that, but the control was not as total as it is today. I mean, they've got kill switches everywhere you look on the dissemination of information now. It's because the technology is so great. So the easier it gets, and the more people you can reach with the least amount of effort, the easier it gets to control because there are switches all along the line.
I guess that's my last question, and I want to see what you say. But for me, I've only been born in this era, so when the internet came out, YouTube, I thought I was only doing hip hop at the time. I was like, oh, this is great. Now people could see me because nobody cares about me in my town, and I'm not from New York City or Los Angeles, so I'm screwed basically. My parents are not in the industry, so YouTube comes out, I just start rapping on a webcam as
Yeah.
frequently as I can, and it was a huge blessing for me. And then it's been a blessing, but I do feel like I'm not a victim, but I do feel like I've been swimming against the grain. And once I got to a certain point, like you said, I do feel like they knocked me down a few pegs. So, I guess my last question would be, you think it's worse now than it was, or do you think it's better in some ways because everybody has a cell phone and the ability to reach people?
Yeah, that's one of those questions where it's a yes and a no. It is worse now, but it does have advantages too that are better. Put the two together, I don't know, and shake them up in this bag. The net number probably is that I think for today, this moment in time, it's better because you and I are talking right now. We're going to get this out, so we still can get the word out. We still have side channels, and there's leakage in the system. And but they're working day and night to plug up all the leaks, and if we don't stop them, they'll get all the leaks plugged. They'll It's coming to the day where they're talking about it now that they want everybody to have a license before you can go online with any kind of a message. Before you can broadcast at all, you've got to have a license that to make sure that you're a responsible person, you understand, and that you're not disseminating, propaganda or untruths or pornography or something terrible like that. So, and the gum chewing public will say, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. We don't want any of that." So they'll go for the idea if we don't reach them first. And then in the long term, though, if we don't turn this around, it's going to be much worse than it is today. But for today is going great.
That's a good answer. Any last words for my audience and anybody who's listening? Perhaps not my audience, but they're here. So that I guess
Well,
technically that would make
yeah,
them the audience.
to anybody that has listened this far and stuck with it this far, they probably are more or less sympathetic with our 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 position on these things. Let's put it that way. So I'm talking now to a small group, a cross section of the population. Most people don't care about the things we're talking about, have no awareness of their being important at all. But to those that do, I'd say, don't give up. It's not over. The fight is not over. I think we mentioned before that this is a propaganda war or a psychological war, which includes propaganda. And one of the strongest weapons of war was well described by Sun Tzu, that famous Chinese philosopher and warrior who wrote the book Art of War of 500 BC. They teach that in all the war colleges of all the nations in the world. And one of the principles from that book is this: supreme excellence in warfare is to defeat your enemy without having to engage him in battle. And one of the ways in which that is done in today's world is to convince people that it's too late. Resistance is futile, as they would say on television. If they can convince us that it's all over, there's nothing we can do, and they don't have to fight us. And I don't necessarily mean fighting in the streets with guns and bullets and bayonets. I mean real opposition politically and spiritually and intellectually in the media, in the public arena, standing up and speaking out loud and so forth, and organizing and putting on demonstrations and running for office and making sure that you have a good board of education in your local community and all these things. There are plenty of areas of warfare going on right now that are not guns and bombs. And but they don't want us to think about that. They want us to say, oh my goodness, it's over. It's over. Look, they run everything. We can't resist. And that's what I want to warn against. It's not over. It's just begun, folks. And I'm looking forward to victory.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, D. Edward. I appreciate you as always, and I'm sure we'll chat again.
Thank you for inviting me. And I like your questions. I hope the audience appreciates my lack of knowledge in trying to answer those questions, but I did the best I could.
Oh, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.